Hey there guys, so since I did my Avengers Endgame movie review quite recently, I did it last Friday, I figured I would do a bit of a different video here. I figured I'd do a top 10 list for the best movies in the MCU in my personal opinion. Now, just before I get any further, I will say that I am planning to watch Endgame again. I did my review already, and if you guys saw my review and my initial reaction, you know that although I think it's a good movie and I enjoyed it, there were things about it that I was disappointed by, and I had kind of mixed feelings on it. However, a few people have told me online and whatnot that it's one of those movies that's actually better on a second viewing. I have actually been told by a few people that when they saw the movie again and rewatched it, they actually appreciated it a lot more. And, I can believe that because there are movies in the past that I've seen a second time and actually enjoyed a lot more. One example would be the movie Batman Begins, for example. When I first saw that movie, I liked it. But when I rewatched it when it came out on DVD, I absolutely loved the movie. I thought it was badass. And it's like when I first saw Infinity War, I kind of enjoyed it the first time, but then when I saw it again, knowing what happened and whatnot, I thought it was even better. It was the same in regards to that. So I am going to watch Endgame again, probably later this week. So yeah, let me know what you guys think about that. And yeah, this is my top 10 list for my personal favorite movies in the MCU. So let's get started. So coming in at number 10, we have Spider-Man Homecoming, released in 2017, directed by John Watts. This was an interesting one to me. Now, you guys that have been following my movie review series will know that I reviewed this one already. I reviewed it a few weeks back actually, and it was a movie that I had mixed feelings on. And if I'm being honest, this one just made it onto the list. And the reason why I made it onto the list, despite the problems this movie has, I just could not deny how much I enjoyed the special effects in this movie, the action sequences, the wire work was pretty good. And one of my favourite things about this movie, and in fact I would say it probably is my favourite thing about this movie, is Michael Keaton's performance as the villain Vulture. In my opinion, he is one of the best villains in the entire MCU. And what I think I like most about Vulture, and what sort of appealed to me about him as the villain is that he's very different from a lot of the other villains in the series. Although he's a very powerful villain and a very intimidating and dangerous villain, he's a villain that's very much down to earth. He's a villain that I understood his motivations, and what was quite more important to me is the fact that he also understands them. His character in the movie on occasion will reference and will acknowledge the fact that he is very much insignificant in the grand scheme of things. When you think of what's going on with the Avengers, like with Thanos and whatnot, and all the bigger, more astronomical things that are happening in this universe, you very much get the sense that Michael Keaton's character Vulture is very much trying to stay low key and is just trying to support his family, but he's trying to support them through illicit means. And you get the sense that he's a guy who's tried to be good. He's tried to be a family guy, tried to be a very respectable company man. A guy who takes care of his people, takes care of his workforce, but all of that is kind of blown up in his face and it hasn't worked out for him. So he's sick and tired of being a good guy, basically. So he wants to try and do the best he can for his family, despite people getting hurt along the way. And I do understand his character's motivation, and I do understand why he does. And I really did like him as the villain. I just thought Michael Keaton I've always liked as an actor too, and I really did enjoy him as the villain, and also the special effects surrounding the Vulture suit and the wings and stuff like that, and the action sequences and the back and forth between him and Spider-Man. I just thought this was a really fun movie. I really did enjoy it, and despite the movie not having a great supporting cast, and some of the plot points and some of the acting in the movie from some of the supporting cast was pretty bad, some of the dialogue I didn't like, I cannot deny that I did have a lot of fun watching this movie. So yeah, this movie made its way onto the list at number 10. So moving on. Coming in at number 9, we have Thor. Now, this movie was released in 2011 and was directed by Kenneth Branagh, interestingly enough. Now, Kenneth Branagh, I have liked several of his movies directing-wise, and I like Kenneth Branagh as an actor too. And yeah, I thought he did a pretty good job with this Thor movie. I really do. the movie is, I would say, it's more of a comedy than it is an action movie. This is not really a serious type of movie. It's a movie that kind of pokes fun at Thor and a lot of his origins. But there are some serious moments, like that I thought that the acting performance from Chris Hemsworth and from the main villain of the movie, Tom Hiddleston, who plays Loki. I thought that the acting from those two in particular was quite impressive. And you have Anthony Hopkins, of course, who plays Odin in the movie, who's Thor's dad. And Anthony Hopkins' character in the movie, I thought, was quite a good counter to Thor's character, because Thor is obviously a very hot-headed, somewhat inexperienced character who's a bit of a douchebag. He's a bit overconfident, makes rash decisions. Thinks with his heart rather than his head, and that obviously gets him into trouble and leads to some problems in the movie, leads to him getting exiled, unfortunately. And you have Odin, who's obviously a lot more experienced, a lot older and wiser, and a lot more level-headed, and doesn't think with his heart, thinks more with his head. And I thought that the counter between them was quite interesting. And obviously Loki, being the main villain, um, as I said, went on to become the main villain in the Avengers movie, and I really did like Loki. I thought Loki was a really intimidating, but also somewhat likable villain. He has that similar vibe that the Joker has, for example, in Batman. The Joker, even though he's a psychopath who does crazy things, he does it in a way that's funny and charming. I just thought this was a fun movie. The special effects were good. The action sequences were okay. It wasn't the best movie on the list, obviously, but it's a movie I enjoyed. It's a movie I thought was fun. It's a movie that I have fun watching every time I watch it. And again, the humor in this movie is pretty good. This is a pretty funny movie. So yeah, at number 9 we've got Thor. Moving on. So coming in at number 8 we have Captain America: The First Avenger. Now, this is a movie that's quite interesting to me, because although it's not quite as good as the other Captain America movies, I do think it was quite an interesting introduction to the franchise. Quite a good introduction to Captain America. Now, this movie, it's a movie again that I have mixed feelings about. I do think that some of the special effects were really impressive. Some of the action scenes were really impressive. I know that some people had problems with the CGI editing of Steve Rogers. In the beginning of the movie when he's smaller and skinnier. But me personally, I didn't really think it looked that bad. I thought it looked quite authentic. And it's quite impressive how, like, you see him at the start of the movie. He's skinny and he's weak, but you can see that he's like boisterous and he's got a lot of heart and a lot of courage. And I thought it was kind of sweet in a way, and kind of cool how it's like, the German professor who is trying to create the super soldier serum. He's trying to find the perfect specimen, the perfect soldier to give it to. And although he's got all these like really tough and really powerful men who he could give it to, he chooses this guy because it's more to do with what's inside rather than what's outside. The serum will give him strength, it will give him power, but you need to make sure that you give it to somebody who will appreciate that power and use it for good. And there's the scene in the movie which I really like towards the beginning, where he talks to him and he says, he's like, "So do you want to kill Nazis?" And he's like, "I don't want to kill anybody. I just want to make sure we do the right thing and stuff." And at that point he realized that this is the person. This is the guy who's going to be my Captain America. And I thought that aspect of the movie was sweet, and I thought that this was a really, really just a really good movie, man. I enjoyed it. I think the acting from Chris Evans in this movie was really good. I like Tommy Lee Jones in the movie. He's kind of like a drill sergeant. And yeah, I just thought this was a fairly decent introduction to the character. And yeah, this was a pretty good movie. So moving on, coming in at number 7, we have The Avengers, the first Avengers movie from 2012. I really, really enjoy this movie, man. I think this movie's a blast. I remember seeing it in the theatre when it came out. Really, really had fun watching it. And this, of course, was a big gamble, because we really didn't know what this movie was going to be like. You'd taken certain characters who weren't really that established, like Captain America and Thor. On the big screen, they'd only had 2 movies. And those movies, whereas they were somewhat well received critically, we weren't really sure whether or not they were going to go on to be like blockbuster type characters, because they hadn't had sequels yet, and it was just a lot of uncertainty going into this movie. But I have to say that this movie really worked, man. It's a blast. It is a bit of a slow burner, it takes a while to get all the Avengers together and to get the action going and whatnot. There's a fair bit of comedy in the movie, like with the Hulk. He was one of my favorite characters in the movie, and yeah, the big action sequence before, towards the end of the movie, where Hulk ends up taking on Loki. That became quite iconic, as you guys know. And yeah, I just thought this was a really good movie, man. I thought that the sort of the tragic type of relationship between Hawkeye and Black Widow was quite well acted, and that was something that carried on, throughout the rest of the series. Because, as you guys probably know, in this movie, Hawkeye gets kind of brainwashed and turned against the Avengers. I thought that Samuel L. Jackson in this movie, being that sort of the mentor to them all and bringing them all together, and the sequences with him where he has to sort of justify things that he's done, and some of the banter between the characters, like the friction that's building between Steve Rogers and Tony Stark. There's a bit of tension there. Iron Man and Captain America, when they first meet each other, they really don't like each other. Very different type of people, and they act as sort of a counter between one another. And it's interesting to see how that relationship starts off, because obviously they do end up as friends, but end up falling out later in the series. And it's really interesting to see how that builds. And I really do like the tension between those two, and I really do think that this movie is really fun. It's just a real fun, large scale comic book movie, and I just had a pure blast watching this one. I think the first Avengers was a solid, real solid first attempt at putting this team together, and it's just a really good movie. I don't really know what else to say about it, other than I think that Loki was the right choice to have as the villain, because obviously, he was a fan favorite from the Thor movie. He was one of the best things about that movie, and I thought it was a really good idea to make him the first main villain for an Avengers movie, because of obviously that fanfare, and how likable the character was, despite being a villain and despite being a bad guy. He's a very duplicitous character. He's a character who does play both sides. He's a character who you're not 100% sure of his intentions all the way through the series. And I do think that as the main villain, he really did impress a lot of people. And I really do like this movie. I think it's a good movie, and I enjoyed it. So moving on. So coming in at number 6, and this is one I really had to think about. I wasn't 100% sure which of these to put first at this point, but I decided to put the Iron Man movie at number 6, the first Iron Man, directed by Jon Favreau, who ultimately in the movie plays Happy Hogan, who pops up here and there in the MCU. And yeah, he directed the first Iron Man movie. I think this movie's really impressive, man. This was, of course, the first movie made in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and I remember when this movie came out, and I remember seeing it the first time, and I didn't know, as most people didn't, upon seeing this movie, I didn't know that it was going to be part of a wider universe. I didn't know that it was going to be Avengers movies and whatnot. And yeah, this movie I just thought was a really good first attempt at an Iron Man movie. I think Robert Downey Jr., I really grew to like him as an actor throughout the series, and I didn't know anything about Robert Downey Jr. before I saw this movie. And it's funny how at this stage of his career, and at this stage of all that's gone on after all these movies, we can't imagine anybody else playing Iron Man other than him. He was definitely the best part of the movie. And another thing I really liked about the plot of Iron Man, was I really do like how at the start of the movie he's kidnapped, and he's forced to sort of make weapons for the enemy. He's kidnapped by these terrorists, and during this plot, he figures out that a lot of the weapons that he'd been developing for the government and for the military, these weapons had been falling into wrong hands. They'd been falling into terrorist hands and stuff like that. So he feels as if he has a lot of blood on his hands. He feels very guilty. And a lot of the stuff that he does in the movie, and a lot of his motivations for becoming Iron Man, were through guilt. His guilt kind of took him over, and I really like the way that that's portrayed in the movie, because at the start of the movie he's kind of depicted as an asshole. He's a bit of he's like a rich billionaire playboy who develops weapons, and he's an arms dealer for the government and the military, and he goes to parties. He seems like a bit of a womanizer. He drinks a lot, and he just comes across as a bit of an asshole. But throughout the movie he develops, and you do figure out this guy really does have a heart, and he really does have a conscience. And there's a real sweet scene in the movie where he gets given a gift from his assistant, and it says proof that Tony Stark has a heart. And I thought that that was quite sweet. And yeah, I like the relationship, how it plays out between those two. And I really do like this movie, man. I think Iron Man's a really interesting character, and like I said, I like his motivations. I like his character development. There's one scene in the movie that was actually cut out, and it was actually a deleted scene, which I'm not quite sure why they cut that scene out, because for me it makes the movie a little bit better. And it's a scene where the villain is about to fall, and although this guy has obviously put Tony Stark through a lot of shit, put a lot of people's lives in danger and stuff, and you would expect him to want to kill this guy, Tony Stark actually takes the guy's hand and tries to save him. And I don't know why they cut that scene out. I'm not quite sure, because that scene to me, it really did put the icing on the cake for showing you that this guy is a good person. This guy is a hero. He does care about people. And I don't know why they cut that scene out. I really don't, because I thought it was a good scene. So yeah, for whatever reason they cut that scene out, but it's still a really good movie. The special effects are really good. The CGI is really good. There's a fair bit of humor, like where he's trying to build the Iron Man suit, and he makes mistakes here and there, and he ends up like throwing himself at the wall and stuff, and where he's trying to create like the flying mechanism of his suit and stuff like that. It was quite funny. There's a fair bit of humor in the movie. It's decent. The villain in the movie was, he was okay. He was quite forgettable. Ironmonger, I believe his name was. He has like a big giant Iron Man suit, and he's kind of like evil Iron Man basically. But yeah, he was just a kind of a throwaway villain. But I still thought the movie was really good. I really enjoyed it. So yeah, number 6 we got Iron Man. Coming in at number 5, we have Avengers Infinity War. Now, I think a lot of people have this as their number 1. A lot of people think this is the best movie in the MCU. And while I cannot deny that I had an absolute blast watching this movie, and it's a really fun movie, and I actually saw it multiple times in the theatre, it's a movie that I have to say, I just think there are other movies other movies in the MCU that had a little bit more substance to them, and I'll get to that. There's other movies that had slightly better action sequences and slightly better effects and whatnot, and a slightly less convoluted plot, but still, I had an absolute blast with this movie, man. Thanos is the villain. Thanos is probably my favorite villain in the entire MCU. He was a badass villain. Obviously there was a big build up throughout the entire series since the first Avengers movie, when there was Thanos in the after credits, and obviously since then we've been waiting to see what he would look like and sound like and whatnot. And I just thought Josh Brolin killed it. He was great as Thanos, and I mentioned earlier I really liked Michael Keaton's Vulture, who's kind of a low key sort of villain, a street ground level villain. Well, Thanos is the astronomical level villain. He's a guy who's like a conqueror. He's an alien, and he conquers worlds. And this guy's extremely powerful, extremely resourceful, extremely cunning, intelligent, but extremely psychopathic. Like, this guy is an absolute psychopath who does not care who gets stomped on in order to achieve his goals. And I really do think that in this movie, like with the way he's introduced in the movie, he kicks Thor's ass, he kicks Loki's ass, he kicks Heimdall's ass, and he even kicks Hulk's ass. Like, he kicks all of their ass in the opening scene of this movie. So he's an extremely powerful and intimidating villain. And I just really thought his acting and even his character development, to be honest, throughout the movie, even that was impressive. So I think this movie's really good, man. I love the scene where, Thor shows up in Wakanda and he's like, "Give me Thanos!" Like, that scene was just, really gets you, really gets the adrenaline going. And, the big battle in Wakanda in that scene was really fun, really impressive. Just a really, really great movie, man. Really enjoyed it. And yeah, number 5 we have Avengers Infinity War. Now, coming in at number 4, this is going to surprise a lot of people. I'm sure a lot of people are going to be like, "Are you kidding me?" But This movie, in my opinion, might actually be the most underrated movie in the MCU, and that is The Incredible Hulk from 2008. I absolutely love this movie, and I have no idea why this movie, in all these MCU movies, when people talk about movies in the MCU, this is one that a lot of people tend to overlook. I think this movie is a masterpiece. I really enjoy this movie. I would say that this movie is on par with most of the movies in this series. And yeah, the movie was directed by Louis Leterrier. I think that's how you pronounce his name. And yeah, it was released in 2008, not that long after the Iron Man movie. And it's a movie that I remember when it came out. And one of the criticisms that I can remember seeing about this movie is some people said, "Oh well," this is not like just online. This is even people in my personal life. I heard say this. They were saying things like, "Oh well, it's just mindless destruction and carnage, and it's the Hulk getting angry and going Hulk smash and smashing things up, and that's the whole movie, and it's boring." Guys, am I missing something? I must be missing something. If I'm going to see a Hulk movie, if I'm if I'm going to see a movie based on this character, based on the Hulk, that's exactly what I want to see. I want to see him smash things. I want to see him break things up. I want to see him go crazy. I want to see a fast-paced action movie. That's the type of thing I expect. And you remember when the Hulk movie came out in 2003, and I remember that movie got panned. Everybody hated it, and I thought that movie was pretty underrated too. But I thought this movie was considerably better. I mean, the special effects in this movie are really good. The CGI is excellent. The main villain in the movie, who's Emil Blonsky, otherwise known as Abomination. I remember him from the comics and from the Hulk TV show in the 90s. I loved that. And yeah, I really liked him as the villain, man. He's really creepy. He's really, he's really big and muscular. He's even bigger than Hulk. He's very, very imposing. He has a big creepy spine sticking out. And I thought that the special effects, involving his transformation, not just at the end of the movie, but earlier in the movie too, where he's taking sort of a knockoff version of the Captain America Super Soldier Serum. I thought that was quite interesting. And yeah, like the army are trying to recreate the Super Soldier, but they can't because the guy who originally made it died in Captain America, and that kind of ties into the plot of this movie. And yeah, Blonsky's the guy that they're testing it on, and I thought that was quite interesting. The special effects there were quite impressive. Edward Norton is the lead role in the movie. He plays the Hulk. He plays Bruce Banner, and of course he was ultimately replaced for the Avengers by he was replaced by Mark Ruffalo, and I'm not 100% sure who I like better. I would say that if I was given a choice, I'd probably say I liked Edward Norton a slight little bit better than Mark Ruffalo, but yeah, Edward Norton only portrayed this character in one movie, and I thought he did a decent job. I like the start of the movie where he's kind of looking for a cure and he's on the run from the government and stuff like that, and yeah, there's just a decent build up. I think this is a really fun movie. I had an absolute blast watching it, man. It's a fast paced movie. It's not a movie that wastes any time, and it's a movie that has plenty of action and what you would expect from a Hulk movie. So yeah, coming in at number 4 we have the Incredible Hulk. Coming in at number 3 we have Thor Ragnarok. Now Thor Ragnarok, one of the things that I've seen a lot of people criticize about the movie is, and I can kind of understand it to some extent, is that the movie's a pure comedy. Like, it's not taken seriously at all. And although that is true, I cannot deny how great this movie is. This movie is amazing. I love this movie. I've seen it time and time again. I saw it multiple times in the theater. I've watched it on DVD several times, and I just think this movie's a blast. I really do think it's fun. Obviously, with Thor being the main character, I actually like this movie a lot more than I like the first and second Thor movies. The second one I don't like at all, and I'll get to that when I talk about the top 10 worst movies in the MCU. That's another video though. But this movie, I just think, in terms of the humor that's in this movie, it's really funny. The chemistry between Thor and Hulk in the movie is really good because, as you guys know, Hulk is a big part of this movie. Thor Thor and Hulk sort of find each other in this like gladiator arena, and they have this big fight, and it's a really really cool fight, and it's back and forth. and it's that's a really good scene too. And yeah, Loki's in this movie. And what's interesting about this movie is Loki isn't the villain. In this movie, he's actually, although he still sort of plays both sides, and he's still not really it's still not really clear what his intentions are. He does actually do a lot more good in this movie than he does bad, and I think that the way that this movie is resolved and the way that sort of adopted brother relationship between him and Thor works out in this movie, it's quite sweet, and I like the dialogue between them. There's some real good humor in this movie, like a scene where you remember the scene in Avengers where where Loki gets bashed into the ground by Hulk. Well, there's a scene where the same thing happens to Thor, and then Loki's like, "Yeah, that's how that feels. Now you know." And I thought that was pretty funny. The special effects are good. CGI is really good. I like the way that the movie begins. You get this big, battle between Thor and this big demon, who becomes, quite significant to the plot, of course. And I just think this is a really good movie. You got Kate Blanchett; she plays the main villain. I'm not a big fan of Kate Blanchett as an actor personally, but she did a decent enough job as the villain. She's like this demon, and she's very different to what she was in the comics. In this movie, she's actually Thor's older sister, whereas in the comics she wasn't. She was like a demon of death and whatnot. But whatever, that didn't really make much of a difference. I still thought she was decent enough as the villain. She was powerful, she was intimidating, she was a total bitch, and yeah, as a villain, she was quite an interesting one to me. And yeah, I like the way this movie's resolved. I like the ending. I like the sort of the message behind it. And yeah, I like that Thor in this movie really has to step up, because in the first movie, like I mentioned, he was a bit hot-headed and a bit of a douchebag, and he had to learn by his exile. And in this movie, you do get the sense that his character has progressed, and he's not the same anymore. He's a lot more responsible and a lot more rational in this movie than he was in the previous movies. So I just thought this was a really good movie, really, really entertaining action movie. Like I said, good special effects, good comedy, and I really enjoyed it. So coming in at number two, and this one was a toss-up for me whether I would put this at number two or number one, but I decided ultimately to put it at number two, and that is Captain America: Civil War from 2016. Now, this is another one that I saw multiple times at the theater, and then ultimately bought on DVD because I had an absolute blast with it. This movie, like Thor Ragnarok before it, it's very comedic. There's a lot of comedy in the movie. But what's different about this movie and why I put this movie over Thor Ragnarok is this movie, in my opinion, has a it's considerably more well balanced than Thor Ragnarok was. I would categorize Thor Ragnarok as more of a comedy than an action film and a serious film, whereas this movie definitely got the right balance. Like the way the movie begins, the Avengers make a mistake and a lot of people get killed, and as a result of that, there are repercussions. And I like the idea of the plot of this movie because obviously, with what the things that the Avengers do, there's gonna be repercussions. There's gonna be things that happen, like people are gonna get hurt and people are going to die, and there's going to be collateral damage. And sort of the plot of this movie is it revolves around the Avengers being held accountable for that collateral damage, and because of what happens near the beginning of the movie, the governments of the world, as well as what the remnants of Shield and whatnot, and all the people together they sort of come together, and they create what's called the Sokovia Accords, where they want the Avengers to be officially licensed and officially registered, and it's kind of similar to the plot in the comics, the Civil War comics, which was carried on to the video game Marvel Ultimate Alliance 2, if you guys remember that, where Captain America was all for freedom and didn't want to be registered, whereas Iron Man wanted to register all superhuman beings and have them all fighting under the same banner, basically. And again, that sort of drives a rift between the Avengers and splits the faction up, and that's why it's called Civil War, because the Avengers, two sides of them, ultimately end up fighting each other. And that's the plot of this movie. And I thought that the villain of this movie, Zemo, again, just like Vulture in Spider-Man Homecoming, I thought that he was quite interesting as sort of a street level villain. And what's interesting about his character is he understands and acknowledges that he's nowhere near powerful enough to defeat the Avengers. He could never do it. So instead of that, he tries to play them off against one another and get them to destroy each other. And I thought that the whole idea of that plot was really, really intriguing to me. And it's quite sad the way that this movie resolves. It doesn't really have a happy ending, but it does have something that you can tell could progress into a happy ending, if you know what I mean. It's just a really interesting one, this. I really like this movie, man. And yeah, I would give this movie a solid 8 or 9 out of 10, man. I really do like this movie, and I actually probably am planning to review this one day. I really do like Captain America Civil War. We're introduced to some characters here. You're introduced to Black Panther, for example, and although I really didn't like the Black Panther movie, I thought that was a poor movie. I like his character in this movie. I think that his action sequences, particularly the fight scene he has when he's first introduced, like he fights Winter Soldier and Captain America, and I thought that fight scene was badass. The stunt work was impressive. The CGI was impressive, and I just thought it was a really good fight scene. And yeah, I liked his inclusion into this movie. We're also introduced to Tom Holland's Spider-Man in this movie, and he's really funny in the movie, man. And yeah, he provides a lot of the comedy, and there's also some decent action with him too. But yeah, I like that aspect of the movie, and that's where the sort of the father figure type relationship that Tony Stark has with Spider-Man, that's introduced in this movie as well. It's him that sort of brings him into the fold. So yeah, this was a really good movie, man, and yeah, that comes in at number 2. So coming in at number 1, and like I said before, this was a toss-up between this and Captain America Civil War. Number 1, we have Captain America the Winter Soldier. Now, you guys that have been following my movie review series will know that I'm a big fan of action movies in general. Obviously, I like comic book movies too, but, I like well-filmed, competently filmed action movies with great stunt work and great fight sequences, and this movie ticks all the boxes for me. This movie is amazing. It's directed by the Russos and was released in 2014, and again, it's another one I saw in the theatre and I absolutely loved it. This is a badass movie. It really is. This movie, just in terms of its stunt work and its action scenes and its fight choreography and stuff like that, this movie really, really looks the part, and it's one of the best movies in this entire franchise, and it's one of my favourite superhero movies in recent years. The plot of this movie is another one of its strong points. It involves a conspiracy type plot where the secret organization known as Hydra has infiltrated and taken over SHIELD, who have already been introduced to in the previous movies. And yeah, for many, many years since Captain America was away in the ice, obviously in hibernation, Hydra had infiltrated SHIELD, and they've got agents all over the place. They've completely taken over, and even the director of SHIELD, Nick Fury, who has been their director for a long time and is already established in this franchise, and who's a big part of this movie, by the way. Samuel L. Jackson's character is a big part of this movie. Even he doesn't know about Hydra. He doesn't know that they have infiltrated SHIELD. So Captain America kind of has to uncover this plot and take these people down, and basically has to take SHIELD down because SHIELD is now completely compromised and can't be trusted. And I thought that the way that this plot unfolds, and with the way that Captain America sort of brings his old school ideals into this sort of new age type of plot, with all this technology and all these secret societies and stuff. Captain America brings that old fashioned American optimism into it, and really does come into his own in this movie. And it's interesting, although I'd already seen the first Captain America movie, I wasn't really a big fan of the character Captain America until I saw this movie. This was the movie that really got me into that character, because this is just such a great movie, and I really do. After seeing this movie, like I said, I became a big fan of the character, and I just really like this movie, man. Captain America: Winter Soldier. This is near enough perfect. I really don't have any criticisms for the movie. I like the humor in the movie. The scene where Samuel L. Jackson is in the car and he's being sort of bashed up and shot at, and the car is talking to him. Sort of the AI in the car is like, car is in critical condition, and he's like, you think? And there's the stuff where He just makes some funny one-liners in the movie. Like he's talking about a guy who, he thought was his friend and thought was a good guy, and he's like, this guy turned down a Nobel Peace Prize because he said that, he's like, it's our duty to uphold peace and stuff like that. And then he's like, this is the kind of thing that gives me trust issues, and the stuff like that. There's just some funny jokes and one-liners. There's the scene where Captain America walks into his house and and Nick Fury's just sitting there and is acting weird because he knows there's people watching. And I just think this is a really good movie, man. It's got the right blend between action, serious moments, and comedy. And of course, you're introduced to Bucky, the Winter Soldier, in this movie, who is absolutely badass, and his action sequences throughout the series were really cool. And I just thought this was a blast, man. Really loved this movie. This is my personal favorite in the MCU. It ticks all the boxes for me. Great action sequences, great acting particularly from Chris Evans and Samuel L. Jackson. There's a bit of back and forth between Captain America and Black Widow. She's in this movie and she's got a lot to do in this movie. And yeah, it's just a really fun movie, man. Really fun plot. It ties up a lot of the stuff that went on in the first Captain America movie, and talks about a lot of the stuff that went on during the time where he was away in the ice. And I just thought it was a really good plot, and it's a movie that every time I watch it, I'm always greatly entertained by. So yeah, that's my top 10 movies in the MCU. Let me know what you guys think. If you'd like to see me review any of these movies, let me know in the comment section. And yeah, I'm going to be doing my top 10 worst movies in the MCU, because there are also some disappointing movies and some really bad ones. So I'm going to be doing my review for that. So yeah, my other top 10 list. So stay tuned for that if you guys want to. Let me know what you guys think. Thanks for watching, and God bless.